Intelligent Faith U15. My name is Pastor Jay. We're going to be starting a new mini-series today, as you can see behind me, God, the Best Explanation. And what we're going to be demonstrating over the course of the next couple of videos is that it would seem that God is the best explanation for certain features of reality that we know to be true. So I do encourage you to stick with us for the duration of this series. We're going to be examining certain features of reality that beg for an explanation, that cry out for an explanation. Specifically, the features that we're going to be discussing as we go throughout this little mini-series would be these following features. Number one, we see existence. The existence of the universe, this is a feature that needs to be explained. We can't take it for granted, or we shouldn't take it for granted, that we do exist. A question needs to be asked, why does anything exist rather than nothing? Feature number two, the beginning of the universe. It's a startling discovery that not only does philosophy point to the fact that the universe cannot be infinite and eternal in the past, but also science has demonstrated in the 20th century that there are about 5 definite ways in which we can demonstrate scientifically that the universe had a beginning. So that's feature number 2 that we're going to be examining. Also, feature number 3 would be the fine-tuning of the universe. And this, of course, is the dramatic fine-tuning of the laws of physics, such as the strength of gravity, the speed of light, the cosmological constant, and so forth, that seem to be custom designed and finely tuned for the existence of complex biological life for conscious observers. That's feature number 3 that we'll be examining. Feature number 4 is mathematical applicability. Why is it the case that mathematics even exists at all? And the mathematical reasoning that we do experience and are able to perform in our own minds, why is it the case that mathematics applies to reality as a whole? Why is that the case? How can it be that mathematics has this kind of applicability? And of course, feature number 5, very similar, logical applicability. We need to try to find an explanation for why is it that logic at all exists. The laws of logic, some would say the first principles, how is it even the case that they do exist? And then why is it the case that as we perceive and reason logically, that actually applies to reality and has a kind of correspondence, a compatibility with reality? So we'll explain that feature as well. Feature number 6, moral objectivity. So, of course, in this feature, when we get there, we're going to be talking about morality, that not only does morality exist, but we're going to be making the case that morality is actually objective. And if that be true, it seems that God would be the only sufficient grounding and sufficient explanation for moral objectivity. That there are certain things that all of us believe are wrong or all of us believe are good. Regardless of race, creed, religion, etc., there are some things that are always wrong for all people at all times and all places, and that moral objectivity would seem to cry out for a sufficient explanation. Also, feature number 7, the fact that our universe contains conscious intentionality. The fact that people have the ability to have mental states. The fact that consciousness and conscious intentionality exists within human beings as opposed to non-living material objects like a chair or a rock. That also is a feature of our reality that is quite conspicuous and needs to be explained. And then, of course, feature number 8, theistic possibility. Logically, it is possible that God exists, and that is an interesting feature of our reality, which might yield some surprising conclusions. So I do encourage you to stick with us over the course of the mini-series as we're going to be examining these different features pertaining to our universe. Before we launch into feature number 1, the existence of the universe, let me just say a little bit about seeking to explain the different features of reality that we know to be true. Any good worldview needs to be able to give a good explanation of the wide range of features that we do observe in our universe. Now, what I mean by that is, of course, there are 7 major worldviews. And you, the viewer watching this, you fall into one of these 7 major worldviews. Let me just name them for you quickly. If you've never done any reading on this, never done any research, I do encourage you to do some reading on what worldviews are. A great book by Norman Geisler, Christian Apologetics, would help you with this. I believe there's also a book by Alan Sandage that deals with it. A lot of good worldview thinking and worldview research has been going on in recent years. And you really need to have an understanding of what a worldview is and what the 7 major worldviews are, because you, the viewer, regardless of who you are, regardless of how old you are, or what religion you do or do not subscribe to, or philosophy you do or do not subscribe to, you have, of course, a worldview. A worldview is simply a view of the world, a view of reality. In German, they would say a Weltanschauung, a view of reality, and it's your perspective, basically, your philosophy on life. So the 7 major worldviews would basically be theism, then deism, panentheism, polytheism, finite godism, pantheism, and then, of course, atheism. And these are the 7 major worldviews, the 7 major views of reality and of the world. And if you have a good worldview, listen to this, any good worldview will have a good explanation for the widest range of features possible in our universe. In other words, if the worldview that I subscribe to doesn't have the ability to give me a good explanation for one of these major features that we know to be true, that we believe to be true about reality, it isn't a good worldview to hold. It may give me an explanation, but perhaps it's not a good explanation or the best explanation. And so this is a very good way to test the strength of your worldview. Can my worldview explain adequately certain features that I know to be true about the reality that I inhabit? Now you could think of this kind of as a crime scene investigation thinking. In other words, this is a type of thinking that is used by CSI professionals, murder investigators, or the all-famous Sherlock Holmes. So this is the type of reasoning where you would perhaps arrive on a crime scene and you look at the facts that are known to be true, the evidence that is left behind at the scene of the crime. And you have to formulate a conclusion, formulate a hypothesis, formulate an explanation that best fits with all the features that you know to be true about this crime scene. So as I said, this is a common form of reasoning. It's actually called abductive reasoning. It's employed by crime scene professionals, homicide investigators. It's employed by your car mechanic, auto mechanics, when you take your car to them. And also, this type of reasoning is employed by doctors when you go to get a physical checkup and physical examination. So you bring your car into the mechanic, and he says, well, what are the symptoms of your car? What's happening with your car? And you give him a list or rundown of those mechanical symptoms, and based upon that, based upon what he knows to be true about those symptoms, and he knows to be true about the systems of the car in general, he can seek to then formulate the best explanation off of the numerous features that he knows to be true about your particular vehicle. Same thing with the CSI professional or the homicide investigator. You would come to a scene of the crime, and based upon the murder weapon left behind, the fingerprints, the blood, the DNA evidence, the circumstantial evidence, etc., eyewitness evidence, it is the job of these professionals to formulate the best explanation that gives the fullest understanding of the known facts, the fullest understanding of the evidence that we have in this situation. Same thing is true with the doctor. You give him your symptoms, and he has to give a best, well-rounded, full explanation of your symptoms. Now, of course, you don't have to. A worldview doesn't have to explain all of these features. It could perhaps explain only 1 or 2 features. But my point is, friends, that would not be a good worldview. So whether you subscribe to deism or atheism or theism or pantheism, whichever of the 7 major worldviews you subscribe to, hopefully you've thought about this. Hopefully you realize that if your worldview is a worldview worth having, it gives a sufficient explanation, a good explanation, a broad and deep explanation of these features that we recognize to be true about the reality that we live in. Something also to take into consideration, when we do give explanations, we need to have things in there. If we want it to be a good explanation, it needs to have something called explanatory scope. And so this is an explanation that explains the broadest number of features. So, a worldview that would explain 1 or 2 features would be inferior to a worldview that could give a good, sufficient explanation for 8 features. Explanatory scope is something you want to look for in a good worldview that seeks to explain the widest array, the widest number of features possible in reality. You also want to look for explanatory power. What is the power, the ability, the depth of that worldview to explain each of these features? Is it only a surface explanation? Is it only a minimal explanation? Or does it have a high degree of explanatory power? You also want to look for plausibility. Is the explanation for the certain features in a given worldview, is it more plausible than not? Because that is a good explanation. It's not that people are seeking to prove, or perhaps even can prove with 100% mathematical certainty that this feature is explained 100% with 100% degree of certainty by this answer. What we're looking for here is a high degree of plausibility, that it's more plausible than not that this is the best explanation. And then finally, another feature you want to look for in a good worldview is a minimal degree of ad hocness. In other words, a minimal amount of adjusting information, stretching the facts, and really just coming up with a very, very poor excuse and kind of false information within your explanation. So you want to look for a good worldview, and these are going to be some of the features that you want to look for. Explanatory scope, explanatory power, a minimal amount of ad hocness, and a high degree of plausibility. And as I said, this type of reasoning is very common in homicide investigations, CSI professionals, your doctor, and even auto mechanics. So this is a good, reliable way of looking at a situation. This is a very often employed form of reasoning, and it's called abductive reasoning. Now, of course, you know as the viewer, there are 3 major types of reasoning, 3 major types of thinking about an issue that we can employ. You have inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and then this, abductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning is mostly employed by the scientific method. Now, this can give us reliable truth about reality. Inductive reasoning can be used and relied upon, but you have to realize that the highest degree of certainty that inductive reasoning can provide you with is a percentage, a probability, 10%, 50%, 60%, etc. And the likelihood, the probability of inductive reasoning is contingent upon many things. Background information, the size of the set that you are analyzing, etc. And so inductive reasoning, as used by the scientific method, it can give us definitely reliable information about reality. Scientific knowledge, of course, is very valuable, but it doesn't give us the surest way of knowing certain things. It only gives us a certain degree of probability, hopefully a high degree of probability. And for that reason, many scientific thoughts and theories and perspectives have been overturned and changed because all they gave you was a certain degree of probability, and that degree of probability was exceeded by another discovery that was later uncovered in the future. So inductive reasoning is scientific reasoning mostly. We then have deductive reasoning, and deductive reasoning is very reliable. And deductive reasoning goes from a large universal premise down to a particular situation. So deductive reasoning seeks to use the universal, it starts with a universal premise, and it seeks to apply that to a particular situation. Inductive reasoning is exactly the opposite. It starts with a small particular situation and seeks to establish a large universal presence. So for inductive reasoning, you can envision a triangle. Starting at the top, it uses a small particular situation. It reasons from the particular to the universal. Inductive reasoning, or rather deductive is an inverted triangle. It reasons from the universal to the particular situation. So deductive reasoning is mostly the reasoning of philosophical argumentation. And so in deductive reasoning, you want to try to start out with a universally true premise, and that, of course, is the challenging thing, to find a premise that is universally and always true. But if you can find one, then you can reason from the universal down to a particular with a 100% guarantee of accuracy. So this is possible. If the premises are true in a logically deductive argument, you can actually get a higher probability of correctness than you can with an inductive argument. Now, most people, many of you viewers perhaps, are rolling your eyes or not agreeing with that, but this is actually the case. that deductive reasoning, when performed properly, can give you a much higher degree of certainty in your conclusion than scientific reasoning. So though many of you perhaps would disdain philosophy or disdain logical or deductive reasoning, it can actually, when done correctly, give you a higher probability of certainty than inductive or scientific reasoning. And then finally we come to this form of reasoning, which is somewhere in the middle. Abductive reasoning, again, is looking at the facts, looking at the known data, the known facts, and trying to establish the best explanation of the facts that we know to be true. And as I said, next time we are going to get into feature number 1, the existence of the universe. I do encourage you to tune back in with us for that, because this is a question, this is a feature of our universe that needs to be explained. And the German Christian philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he put it so correctly. When he posed the question about the existence of the universe, why is there anything rather than nothing? Why is it the case that anything exists at all as opposed to nothing? That is a feature that needs to be explained, and we'll get into that in our very next video. We did the introduction, and now we're going to be jumping into feature number 1, the existence of the universe. Do encourage you to check out our website, intelligentfaith315.com. Encourage you to look at our YouTube channel if you're not already there. Go to YouTube and type in Intelligent Faith 315, and also encourage you to go to iTunes and check out our podcasts that are there. There's an Intelligent Faith radio podcast. We have another podcast entitled Reason to Believe. That's reason in the singular, reason to believe. And finally, an older third podcast called Kerusso, K-E-R-U-S-S-O. Kerusso, which is the Greek word for a proclamation of authority and formality. So I encourage you to check out those resources. Come back and join us as we begin to examine this all-important feature, the existence of our universe. Until next time, have an intelligent faith.